This morning by telling you a little story. Last week, I told a joke about Brother Dan having a flat tire and his wife finding her on the side of the road fixing the flat while Dan was asleep in the back seat of the car. Well, it was interesting when I left church last Sunday. I read the sign out in front of the church, and it asked the question, is prayer your steering wheel of your life or your spare tire? You remember that? Larry had that on last week. He does such a good job with that sign out there. I think, give him a hand for doing a great job. And people all the time mention that sign, and they look forward to seeing what's on it. Well, Dan called me. When did you call me? Tuesday?
I think so.
Tuesday morning. And he said, Pastor, you're a prophet. I don't hear that very often. He said, I had a flat on I-69. And I realized, after I had told the story about him, the spare tire and the jack, that the car that he owns, and I own one just like it, the Malibu, doesn't have a spare tire and doesn't have a jack. And so I had ordered one, and now I have a spare tire and a jack in my car in case I have a flat. But Dan had a flat and had to have his car towed to Discount Tire to get it fixed. And we said this morning, we were laughing about it, that I believe that God does have a sense of humor. You know, I'm just glad I didn't share some story that was a terrible calamity, just a flat tire. But I thought it was really neat how God just kind of chuckles, I think, sometimes at our experiences in life. This morning, I want to share with you a message about God's love. Now, I want to tell you that I have maybe 15 minutes this morning to preach. But I could preach for hours and hours and days and weeks and months and years. I could preach, if I had the strength, the rest of my life talking to you about God's love, and I would never even touch the hem of the garment of the subject of God's love.
Amen.
God's love is so great.
Yes.
That we can't even comprehend it in our finite minds. It is infinite, beyond anything that we can even comprehend.
Yes.
God's love is so great. I read the story, and then I went back last night and I read some more of the biography of a young man by the name of Henry Morehouse. Henry Morehouse, as a young man, was wild. He loved to fight. He loved to steal. He loved to be in trouble. He was from England. And one night he heard a commotion on the street, and he thought there was a brawl going on. And so Henry Morehouse rolled up his sleeves at 17 years of age, and he went into this crowd thinking there was a big fight, and it was a revival meeting. And instead of a fight, he heard about Jesus, and Henry Morehouse, before it was over, had fallen on his knees and given his heart to Christ, and immediately started preaching the love of God. And he used the verse, John 3:16, as a young Christian. Most of us learned that verse, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That was Henry Morehouse's verse. And he preached from that verse for several years. And then in England, D.L. Moody, who pastored the largest church in the United States at that time, the Great Moody Church in Chicago, happened to be preaching in England, and Henry Morehouse approached him and said, Dr. Moody, I would like to come and preach at your church in Chicago. And Moody said, well, if you're ever in the area, give me a call or let me know, and I will work it out. Next thing you know, Henry Morehouse is in the United States. He travels to America. He contacts Dr. Moody. Dr. Moody happens to be going out of town for the weekend, so he invites him to come and preach at the Great Moody Church in Chicago. And he preaches on Sunday morning and Sunday night on John 3:16. For God so loved the world. Dr. Moody returned to Chicago on Monday, and he said to his wife, he said, "How's that young preacher?" She said, "He's good. He's very good. But he does not preach like you do." For Dr. Moody was a hellfire and brimstone type of preacher who was constantly preaching about the wrath of God and the anger of God and how sinners, must repent or they would burn in hell. And that was kind of Dwight Moody's preaching at that time. And Dr. Moody said, "We must have him. I want to hear him." And Monday night he was back, and Dr. Moody went to hear him, thinking, "I don't want to like this young man. I don't want to really listen to this young man because he doesn't preach the way I do." But as Dr. Moody listened to this young man, Henry Morehouse, preach about the love of God, he felt his heart, in his own words, begin to soften. And he invited him to come back night after night, and Henry Morehouse was there for a week at the Moody Church preaching, and every night he preached from John 3:16 on the love of God. And Dr. Moody, Dwight Moody, said that his ministry changed radically during that time. He went from that hellfire and brimstone message to preaching the love of God. And he said, "It changed my life. It changed my ministry." And he said, "I found I had more power in my ministry after hearing Henry Morehouse preach that way." Henry Morehouse preached until he was in his late 30s. He got sick, and then he died. But Henry Morehouse made the statement before he died. Let me find it here. He said, "If I preach for the rest of my life, and I only had one message to preach, every night I would preach about the love of God." And he said, "If I were to have a ladder come down from heaven like Jacob did and see the angels ascend and descend, and I were able to climb that ladder and talk to Gabriel himself in heaven and ask Gabriel what is the greatest message the world will ever hear," he said, "I believe the only thing that Gabriel could even say would be, for God so loved the world,
Amen,
that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish,
yes,
but have everlasting life."
yes,
We have heard Brother Dan sing the beautiful song, "The Love of God." And this song just gives you just a taste of what God's love is like. The love of God is greater far than tongue or pen can ever tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair, bowed down with care, God gave his Son to win. His erring child he reconciled and pardoned from his sin. When hoary time shall pass away and earthly thrones and kingdoms fall, when men who here refuse to pray on rocks and hills, on mountains call, God's love so sure shall still endure, all measureless and strong, redeeming grace to Adam's race, the saints and angels' song.
yes,
The third verse of this song, which I believe is the most powerful verse, was actually found penciled on the wall of an insane asylum by a man who had just passed away. And this man wrote this on the wall of his cell. He wrote these words, "Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry.
amen,
Nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky."
Yes.
O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure, the saints and angels' song. You see, the love of God is the most powerful force in the world.
Amen.
The love of God is the most life-changing force in the world. When we read that verse about the love of God, we read, for God, the greatest one, so loved the greatest degree, the world, the greatest number of people, that he gave the greatest generosity, his only begotten, the greatest uniqueness, Son, the greatest gift, that whosoever, the greatest invitation, believeth in him, the greatest simplicity,
Yes.
should not the greatest certainty perish, the greatest possible loss, but the greatest difference, have the greatest possession, eternal, the greatest length and quality, life, the greatest hope.
Amen.
The love of God,
Amen. Yes.
so rich, so pure,
Yes.
for each and every one of us.
Amen.
Jeremiah 31:3, God says, I have loved you. With an unfailing love, I have drawn you to myself.
Mm-hmm.
That whatever you've done, I love you, I care about you, I want you to be mine. Mm-hmm. He wants us to be adopted into his family. He wants to adopt us. He wants to love us. He wants to care for us with all of his heart. You know, one of my favorite gospel songs is a song by Bill Gaither. And the song that he wrote a while back, and every time I sing it, every time I hear it, I can so identify with it. I mentioned that the badge of my Forgotten Man Ministry jail jacket, my red jacket, has SSG. And that means Sinners Saved by Grace. And that's the name of the song that Bill Gaither wrote. Listen to these words. If you could see what I once was, if you could go with me back to where I started from, then I know you would see the miracle of love that took me in its sweet embrace and made me what I am today, just an old sinner saved by grace. How could I boast of anything I've ever said or done? How could I dare to claim as mine the victories God has won?
Mm-hmm.
Where would I be had God not brought me gently to this place? I'm here to say I'm nothing but a sinner saved by grace.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just a sinner saved by grace. When I stood condemned to death, he took my place. Now I live and breathe in freedom with each breath of life I take. I'm loved and forgiven. I'm back with the living. I'm just a sinner saved by grace. Isn't that powerful?
Amen.
Now when Brother Dan sang his song this morning, if you notice when we clapped, he went like this and then he pointed toward heaven. We realize that is only the grace of God that we are here in church this morning sharing the message of God's love with you, rather than being in some maximum security prison somewhere, because of who we really are.
Amen. That's right.
I know who I really am without Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I tell you what, it's scary. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Without Christ, I would be nothing but lost. I don't even know if I would be alive if it weren't for Jesus.
Amen.
And I certainly wouldn't have the joy of Christ in my life without Jesus.
Yes. Yes.
We are sinners saved by grace. Christ died on the cross to adopt us into his family. And he wants us to know his love.
Amen.
The great, great love of God.
Yes.
That fills us. I can still remember the psychologist who looked at me when I was in my 30s and was going through what they called post-traumatic stress syndrome from my childhood, not from war, but from the childhood that I had. He said to me, he looked at me, and he said, you have a hole in your soul, Hal, that is infinite and I can't help you. Well, you talk about discouraging. I went home so discouraged that I was going to live the rest of my life with this hole in my soul. And then God spoke to me. As I was praying, God spoke to me, and he said, Hal, you may have a hole in your soul that's infinite, but my love is infinite.
Amen.
I can fill that hole.
Yes.
And I went to prayer and I called upon the Lord, and the Lord filled that hole in my soul. He filled my heart to overflowing with love. And after he filled that infinite hole that psychologist told me about, his love just continues to overflow.
Amen. Hallelujah.
There's no limit to God's love.
Amen. It's true. It's true.
Oh, my friends, if you don't know Jesus, I encourage you this morning as Brother Dan comes to lead us in beautiful song, softly and tenderly. Jesus is calling.